Do these sentient piñatas look a little familiar to you? They are a part of a franchise called Viva Piñata, a series of Xbox games from the early 2010s, and have since been forgotten. They also got a mostly mediocre TV show to go along with the games, both of which form a larger story that I'm going to talk about now. But first, since this series is Spanish themed, well, not really, but the title is, I am going to do this entire video in Spanish. So here we go. Dado que solo hay un pequeño porcentaje de ustedes en la audiencia que realmente habla español, estoy completamente mintiendo en los subtítulos, y eso es divertido. Si me preguntas, tampoco hablo español, solo 3 años en la escuela secundaria, así que si esto está mal, de todos modos culpe a traductor, no a mí. Okay, I'm kidding. I'm not actually going to do that. It probably sounded like I hit my head and then tried to read Spanish. The game series and TV series are very different, and are really only connected with the characters and their land. That being Piñata Island, an island full of diverse species of piñatas. There are many different regions where certain piñatas are exclusively found, like the Pinarctic and the Desert Desert. Also on Piñata Island is Jardinero's Garden, which eventually becomes the player's garden. When you begin the game, you are given a garden to take care of. This is Jardinero, regarded as the best gardener on all of Piñata Island. He romance danced with his wife, who he calls Mother, which Jardinero claims he was an expert at, and thus has 4 children, Lifos, Stardos, Storkos, and Sidos. Jardinero spent his entire life gardening, which attracts piñatas, which leads to more gardening. He was the best of the best. He tried to teach his expertise to a man named Lester. He attempted to make Lester his pupil, but you know how pupils end up. Lester is a bad boy. Despite being so amazing, there was one species of piñata Jardinero was unable to attract. Lester tricked his master that his coveted piñata species was away at a certain location, and so the ultimate gardener went on this journey, leaving his children, and more importantly, his garden, unattended. Unknowing his evil pupil was going to F the S up, Lester gave the eldest Stardos evil sour candy, which corrupted him, turning him into Das Stardos. And speaking of name changes, Lester changes his name to Pester and destroys the entire garden. Lifos was the only one left in the garden. The other 2 siblings were off living their lives. Lifos gifts the player the disheveled garden so they can fix it back up. You, the player, garden, attract piñatas, make certain accommodations, and complete requirements to get the piñatas to join your garden. And then you have to continue to take care of them so they stay at the garden. Jardinero does return, and along with Lifos, helps the player with tips and tricks and such. Pester, now Professor Pester, along with Dastardos and their team of ruffians, invade the garden and continue to beat the piñatas to death. And another task of the player is to defend the garden from them. Another species you must defend the garden from are sours. Evil piñatas created by Pester, but proved to be too difficult even for him, so they actually serve no one. The capital of Piñata Island is Piñata Central. This place holds the Cananata, a machine run by a piñata named Langston. When a piñata eats a lot of candy and eventually gets severe candiosity, which is just obesity, they are called the Piñata Central to be launched in the Canyonata. After their launch, the piñatas go to parties around the world to be beat to death. Their bits and pieces are shipped back to Piñata Island to be repaired and start eating again, all to repeat the process. They live to be destroyed in horrific and possibly painful ways. Sorry, I have to say it, these piñatas are masochists. They love getting full, then going to parties, and being destroyed. Seems all cute on the surface, kinda morbid when you actually think about it. The sequel game, Viva Piñata Trouble in Paradise, is like Viva Piñata, but more expansive, but is basically the same game. Pester still wants to conquer all piñatas, I guess to have infinite candy. I guess that's his intention. Maybe revenge on Jardinero for replacing him? I don't really know. I mean, do they not have gas stations or something? He could just go get a Snickers or Gobstoppers or like a Charleston Chew from or something, instead of having to conquer all piñatas? Also, I don't like candy really to begin with, but Charleston Chews are disgusting. In the second game, you can make cooler farms with cooler piñatas. It's essentially what the first game was meant to be. But now speaking of the first game, how about a remake, just a lot smaller and less features? I present Viva Piñata Pocket Paradise. Itty bitty on the DS. But that is not the worst entry in the series. This is Viva Piñata Party Animals. I don't want to judge. I haven't personally played it, but that's the consensus online. Just trying to capitalize, I guess, but does no one ever learn not to put characters in party games that don't have any business being in party games? Ahem. But honestly, that's about as much background as the video game offers, as it's predominantly just a farming sim. So now into the show, which is really the main course of the story. None of the non-Piñata characters are carried over, besides Professor Pester. Online, this show doesn't seem to get all that much love, so I want to add on to that. I watched nearly all 100 episodes. It's fine for what it is, I guess, but this is, very generic. Incredibly generic. The island and the Piñatas inhabiting it are very cool, and the times that the stories are based on the game are much better. But other than that, you have Piñata characters in predicaments that you find any typical cartoon character in. Unfortunately, they don't really bring Pester's depth either. In the show, he's more of the, grrr, I'm a bad guy because I want to be. The basic premise of the show is that they are Piñatas. They love candy, they get fat, and get launched over to parties and die. So that does stay from the games. However, they never show the beating to death part, unfortunately. As you would imagine though, you can't have 100 episodes about that very same thing every time, which leads to many, shall we say, subpar plots. But before I dive into those subpar plots, I must introduce the paper mache freaks that fill the screen. This is Hudson Horstachio. The species names are always a play on the animal it's mimicking, and something to do with a sweet or dessert adjacent thing. He is a celebrity around the island, and a vain one at that. Despite being poised as the main character, I don't personally feel like he is. I think it's this guy, Fergie Fudgehog. While 99% of Piñatas dream of going to parties, Fergie refuses and does everything he can to not be chosen. Polly Pretztail is the same way. He too is repulsed by parties. I can't blame these guys. Getting whacked to death via a bat, probably by a kid high on sugar, doesn't really sound like the best way to go. Even if they are rebuilt, they must have memory of the blindfolded kids swinging at them. Franklin Fizzly Bear, he's doped up 24/7. They don't actually say that, of course, but we all know it's the truth. Les Galagugu is perhaps the best thing Viva Piñata has ever produced. I know they're a dime a dozen, but I'm a sucker for the cutesy characters that can't talk and are capable of immense destruction. Ella Fanilla, her personality is being forgetful. Within seconds, the memory is gone. It is revealed in an episode that Ella was queen of many kingdoms around Piñata Island, basically queen of the whole thing, but her lack of memory was abused, so a bunch of simps at various kingdoms claimed to be her husband, that way they could rise to power, but it always went to their heads, leading to destruction, and then rinse and repeat this process, and eventually the whole queen thing fizzled out, and she's just a regular Piñata now. Tina and Teddington Twingersnap, they sort of have like a cat-dog situation going on here, where there's one snake body, and on each end there's a head. I don't think the Piñatas have to poop, so you don't really have to ask the common cat-dog question with them. Langston Lickatoad, he runs Piñata Central. He is called the Piñata Wrangler because he runs the Canonata. He is in charge of selecting the most obese piñatas for execution. He works under someone named the Big Boss, but no one knows who he is, including Langston, and that guy communicates via speaker that is placed in a fruit bowl. Finally, the last main character is Professor Pester, and we already know about him. He's just sort of flanderized now. There's a few minor characters, like the Great Bon Boon. He's the local whack job grifter pretending to see God and claims he's coming every so often. At some point you'd think they wouldn't believe him, but There's King Rorio, king of all Piñata Island. I don't really think they go into how he rose to power amidst Ella being queen. He plays it off like he didn't take advantage of her memory loss, but they don't prove that. Hudson also has an obsessed fan, Beverly Badgesicle. She's basically his Mark David Chapman. And then there's Dragonosh. That's the species, as there isn't actually a main character of this type. A Dragonosh is the Viva Piñata equivalent of a legendary Pokemon. This species was the one that Jardinero went off searching for. The Piñatas can get sick, which I get they're supposed to be like regular animals, but how are paper mache creatures managing to get sick, assuming they have no regular functioning insides and is just candy? They can contract what's called confetti-itis, where their paper strips fall off. So imagine this for humans. I'm pretty sure our equivalent would be skin. I guess this is kind of like Ebola. As for essentially the rest of the episodes, they revolve around two things. Most commonly, Fergie's incessant attempts at not going to parties. He does anything within his means to avoid parties. or even getting close to one. Out of 100 episodes, that is probably the base plot in at least half of them. At least, I'm being generous. It's probably more. There's no point in really diving deep into those because nothing happens. They were heavily reliant on Fergie being a wuss, and then it just got annoying. And more annoying. It really is a shame. They could have gone more into the other characters. The other plot has to do with Professor Pester, who is, again, now just sort of evil to be evil. I don't know why they didn't really include more of his game backstory. Most of the time, he kidnaps Hudson many different ways. And it's just mostly Hudson, not the other characters. And again, I don't understand his motives. I guess he just wants candy. Now, these have been your pretty average episode plots. But of course, it wouldn't be a really weird show without time travel. I hate time travel, by the way. I've voiced that in many, many different videos because it complicates things to an extent that I cannot explain. Fergie travels back one day and then meets himself, and then he does that again and again and again. I didn't try to think too hard about it, but it may or may not have caused a paradox. In a separate episode, Franklin enters an alternate dimension, and at the end of the episode, he is launched to another dimension, confirming a minimum of 3 dimensions in Viva Piñata. So cool, not only is there time travel, there is a multiverse. Fergie is charged with cannibalism after he eats a chocolate bunny. It's not exactly how that works. The other piñatas didn't realize it was a chocolate bunny and thought it was living, but still Fergie isn't exactly a bunny, so I don't know why they would think that is cannibalism? However, this just may be an excuse to put him behind bars, because that big boss guy, you know, the bowl of fruit, Fergie gets angry at him one time, thinking he was an actual living bowl of fruit, beats the fruit down to mush, and then eats the evidence. This was before he found out it wasn't a living bowl of fruit, so I feel like that kinda constitutes murder. The show gave Hudson an uncle, Uncle Hoofy, and they have honestly a pretty good plot where Hoofy marries Fergie's mother, and Hudson and Fergie become I don't know what that makes them. But that was a little fun episode. It has absolutely nothing to do with Viva Piñata though. And speaking of nothing to do with the franchise, they do a Star Wars parody. Pester is Darth Vader, and he gets a ship and the whole 9 yards. I don't know why they did this. Now I have to somehow figure out how some way, somewhere in the continuum, Pester managed to get a rocket ship. This was a sucky parody though. Among all the episodes, this one sticks out like a very sore thumb. Oh yeah, and one more thing. Fergie, Franklin, and Polly cross-dress one time. So I don't really understand why they didn't try to make the show at least somewhat similar to the game. The first episode is about gardening, and with a few exceptions, nothing else besides characters and locations has anything to do with the game. They easily could have made this serialized and had it follow a story while still throwing in the weird episodes here and there. With farming sims and character collectors being very popular nowadays, I don't see why they don't reboot Viva Piñata. The game. Let me clarify, the game, not the show. Not the show. Let me reiterate one more time. The game. Reboot the game, not the show. It sort of feels like the Xbox version of Pokemon. The 2 main games didn't really sell tremendously, but I almost feel like it came out at an unfair time. It was released in the height of all those more adult games that I'm still not mature enough to play now. I think Viva Piñata should get another chance. Or not. It's not really up to me. Now with the last part of the video, I'd like to take a moment of silence. Our good friend and dedicated father of 15 children, Les Galagugu, was found dead in the streets of St. Louis after falling into a life of crime and addiction. Hey, there was also Burger King toys for this franchise. They literally made toys of anything back then, didn't they?
Hello, Mung, or should I call you President Mung?
Oh, hey, it's been a minute.
I want to apply.
No need to apply, you can have it.
Good.
My fellow Amongakins, sorry for holding a whole application process and everything. This is the new vice president. His name is Nail. We go way back, and I'm sure I'll explain the entire thing in some other video. Don't ask why he's dressed like that, or why he sounds weird. Just don't ask any questions, honestly.
No, go ahead. Ask questions. I'm down to respond to anything.
That's not a good idea. Some people are really mean.
It's important for people to know their new mysterious vice president.
Alright, sounds good to me, I guess. Amongakins, ask him anything you want. He'll be in the comments, I guess. I'll answer the first question. Why doesn't he change positions? Because he's really annoying to draw.
What do you mean, draw?
Don't worry about it.